Hello there and welcome to DOSBox Demystified Part 3. This is understanding the graphics choices that are available to you. Last time we did a little work with editing configuration files. This time just sit back, we're just going to do some learning today. How do you know what graphics options a game supports? Some of them, when you launch them, they'll just straight up tell you what graphics options they support, but unless you know what those options mean, you might not know which one to pick or which one looks best to you. So we're going to cover that today. Other games, the ones that launch and don't ask you, a lot of times they'll have a setup utility. We're going to go through that in a couple parts, but we're going to get through the graphics first. The first and earliest kind of graphics were CGA graphics. As you can tell from the screenshots, they're quite colorful, but they only have 4 colors at the same time, arranged in 2 palettes. There's the top palette, which has got the pink and white and blue, and the bottom palette, which is the black and green and yellow and red. You get either of those choices when it comes to CGA most of the time. CGA has a composite mode, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But the bottom line here is if it's before 1984, you're probably running either black and white, which will take care of itself, or you've got CGA 4-color graphics. And then technology advanced. In the world of 1984, we developed 16-color graphics. And these days, 16-color graphics come in 2 main varieties. The first is called EGA, and the other is called Tandy graphics. They are both essentially the same thing, but the thing to remember for DOSBox use is that Tandy graphics come along with Tandy sound. So if you're using EGA selections, you'll probably get the 16 colors, but you're not going to get that Tandy sound. The sound options we're going to cover in the next part. After EGA, there was VGA. Came along in '87. It took a while to catch on because it was expensive at first. But if you've got a game that's after 1990, it's probably got some sort of VGA support. It also understands CGA and EGA, so if DOSBox is set to VGA, it will play those types of games just fine. It does 256 colors at the same time. It has higher resolutions than previous CGA or EGA. Getting rid of those jinks around the edges. You can see a couple examples there in the screenshots. Notable that this today is the standard for the lowest common denominator of graphics. So if your Windows machine doesn't have any drivers at all, it'll still do VGA because it's the last standard that everybody agreed on. Next up is Super VGA. It's just like VGA, but it's super. And what makes it super is proprietary manufacturer extensions to give it greater support. Much like today's video cards, we've got the NVIDIA versus the AMD around these days, and they both don't agree on technologies and standards to use. It was much like that back in the 90s as well. Anything past the VGA standard is usually locked to a certain breed of card. The default DOSBox one is called S3, and it was widely popular back in the day, so there's a lot of compatibility for S3, but DOSBox has more options if you needed them. Super VGA is compatible with all the previous types of color depth, including normal VGA. It'll do up to 24-bit true color support, which is more than the human eye can see, so it really hasn't progressed past that. You're technically looking at a Super VGA display, assuming you're watching this on a Windows machine. And all of those options might have sound complicated, but really there's only 4 chunks that you need to remember. If it's the early 80s, it's probably CGA. If it's the late 80s, it's probably got EGA. If it's the early 90s, you're looking at VGA. And if it's the late 90s, it's probably Super VGA. But of course, this is an entire spectrum. This is 20 years worth, so there's a lot of blending. And games, of course, support a lot. So there's not uncommon to see a game that'll support CGA, EGA, and VGA all at the same time. Now, as you're experimenting with games and looking through their configurations and settings and so forth, you might notice some other settings being available. And here's some that you might notice. There's Hercules, which was more of a business type adapter. It's high resolution, but it's only black and white, so text-based stuff, you don't see that very often, but it'll be in some games settings. There's PC Junior, which is kind of like Tandy. It's just another name for it. The PC Junior and the Tandy were both competitors to one another. There's MCGA, which is basically like a early form of VGA. They're both 256 color standards. The MCGA is a little bit slower, so if you get the option to choose between one or the other, you want to choose VGA. But if you're on a VGA display, you can choose MCGA and it will work. And the last option is kind of unique. It's the CGA composite mode. Ordinarily, back in the day, you wouldn't have seen this hardly at all because nobody set up their computers this way, but DOSBox will emulate the composite mode of CGA. CGA, as you might recall, has 4 colors normally, but with composite mode, it's got 16 colors it can use, and there's some examples over there. The top is the standard thing you'd see in 4-color mode, but in composite mode, it looks a lot better, even though it's a little bit stretched out. But neither of those looks quite as good as the EGA Tandy 16 color, which is the native 16 color option that you'd want to select. And here you can see what you pick matters, and it makes each game look a little bit different. You can pick what you prefer, but there's usually an optimal solution where it looks the best. And what are we doing next time? Well, basically this again, but with sound examples. We're going to go over all the different sound options. Should be a lot of fun. If you liked what you heard today, if you think I did an okay job, do the like and subscribe, do the YouTube thing. Thank you very much, and I will catch you in the next one.